Intestines ruptured by saddle. On September 9th, 1087, King William I of England rode through the smoldering ruins of Mantes in France. The man who had conquered England 21 years earlier was leading a punitive raid against the French territories that bordered his domain. The town had been set ablaze on his orders, and buildings still burned as he surveyed the destruction from horseback. William was 60 years old by this point, heavy-set and overweight. His body had thickened considerably from decades of feasting and the sedentary life of a monarch. As he guided his horse through a narrow street lined with glowing embers and collapsed timber, the animal suddenly reared. The movement was violent and unexpected. The heavy iron pommel of his saddle was driven upward with tremendous force directly into his stomach. The impact was immediate and severe. William cried out in pain as the blow crushed his internal organs. His attendants rushed to help him down from the horse, but the damage was already done. The king's intestines had been ruptured by the blunt trauma. He was carried to the priory of Saint-Gervais in Rouen, where physicians attempted to treat the injury. There was nothing they could do. For 6 days, William lay in agony as infection spread through his abdominal cavity. The ruptured intestines leaked waste into his body, causing peritonitis. Fever consumed him. The pain was relentless. On September 9th, he finally died, but the horror did not end with his death. At his funeral in Cannes, attendants attempted to place his corpse into a stone sarcophagus that had been prepared years earlier. William's body had swollen dramatically from the infection and decomposition. As the men tried to force the bloated remains into the too small coffin, pressure built against the decaying flesh. The corpse burst open, the abdomen split apart, releasing a wave of putrid gas and decomposed matter. The stench was so overwhelming that mourners fled the church immediately. Priests abandoned the ceremony. The smell lingered for days, a final indignity for the man who had once been called the Conqueror. Crossbow bolt infection. On April 6, 1199, Richard I of England stood outside the castle of Chalus-Chabrol in central France. The king, known as the Lionheart, was besieging the fortress over a dispute about a treasure supposedly found by a local peasant. It was a minor castle, barely worthy of royal attention, but Richard had come personally to oversee its capture. Late in the afternoon, the king decided to inspect the fortifications up close. He approached the castle walls without his chainmail, wearing only light protective gear. It was an act of casual confidence. Richard had fought in the Crusades, commanded armies across Europe, and survived countless battles. A small garrison in a rural French castle posed no real threat in his mind. On the ramparts above, a young man stood with a crossbow. Some accounts called him a boy, others a cook, pressed into defensive duty. He aimed the weapon at the king and released the bolt. It struck Richard in the left shoulder near the neck. The impact knocked him backward, but the wound appeared minor. The bolt had penetrated, but not deeply. Richard returned to his tent and ordered a surgeon to remove it. What followed was butchery disguised as medicine. The surgeon lacked proper tools and skill. He tore at the surrounding flesh, trying to extract the bolt, enlarging the wound significantly. By the time he finally pulled it free, the tissue was mangled and exposed. Within days, the signs of infection appeared. The wound turned red, then purple. Heat radiated from the puncture site. Gangrene began spreading through the damaged tissue, and the smell of rot became unmistakable. Fever overtook the king. His body fought the infection, but lost ground steadily. For 11 days, Richard deteriorated. On April 6th, his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine arrived to sit with him. He was conscious until the end, aware that his death was approaching. In his final hours, Richard ordered that the crossbowman be brought before him. He forgave the man and commanded his release. Shortly after, Richard the Lionheart died from an infection caused by a bungled arrow removal in a meaningless siege. Throat slit by rivals. On June 26, 1541, Francisco Pizarro was inside his palace in Lima, Peru. The conquistador who had toppled the Inca Empire now governed the territory he had claimed for Spain. He was 63 years old, wealthy beyond measure, but surrounded by enemies he had made during years of brutal conquest and political maneuvering. That Sunday afternoon, a group of armed men gathered outside his residence. They were supporters of Diego de Almagro II, son of Pizarro's former partner, whom Pizarro had ordered killed 3 years earlier. The group numbered around 20, armed with swords and daggers. They forced their way through the entrance, shouting threats and accusations. Pizarro heard the commotion from inside. He grabbed his sword and attempted to fasten his armor, but there was no time. The attackers were already rushing through the corridors. A handful of Pizarro's servants tried to hold them back, but were quickly overwhelmed. The old conquistador found himself facing armed assassins with only a partially buckled breastplate in his weapon. The fight was brief but fierce. Pizarro managed to kill 2 of the attackers, despite his age and disadvantage. advantage. He fought with the skill that had carried him through decades of warfare, but he was outnumbered, and the years had slowed him. As he struggled to maintain his defense, one of the men lunged forward and drove a blade deep into his throat. The wound was immediately fatal. Blood poured from the severed vessels in his neck as Pizarro collapsed to the floor. He tried to speak, but could only manage gasps and choking sounds. His hands went to his throat, feeling the warm blood flowing between his fingers. In his final moments, Pizarro dipped his finger into his own blood and drew a crude cross on the stone floor beside him. He leaned down and kissed the symbol, calling out to Jesus Christ. Then he died on the floor of his palace, surrounded by the men who had come to avenge his betrayals. Hacked by Mactan warriors. On April 27, 1521, Ferdinand Magellan waded through shallow water toward the beach of Mactan Island in the Philippines. The Portuguese explorer commanded a force of around 60 Spanish soldiers in full armor. They were launching an amphibious assault against the native chieftain, Lapu-Lapu, who had refused to submit to Spanish authority or convert to Christianity. Magellan believed his European weapons and armor would guarantee victory against what he assumed were primitive fighters. He was wrong. As his men struggled through the knee-deep water in their heavy steel plates, more than 1,000 native warriors gathered on the beach ahead. They carried bamboo spears, scimitars, and bows with poisoned arrows. The battle began the moment Magellan's forces reached the shore. The natives attacked in waves, using their superior numbers and knowledge of the terrain. Magellan ordered his musketeers to fire, but the weapons proved nearly useless in the damp coastal conditions. Many failed to discharge. The crossbows were too slow to reload under sustained attack. Within minutes, the Spanish formation began to collapse. A poisoned arrow struck Magellan in the right leg, penetrating between the plates of his armor. The toxin worked quickly, weakening his mobility. He ordered his men to retreat slowly while he covered their withdrawal. The natives sensed his injury and focused their assault directly on him. A warrior rushed forward and struck Magellan's helmet with a scimitar. The blow knocked it partially off his head. Before he could adjust it, another strike hit him again, this time dislodging the helmet completely. Magellan was now exposed. A bamboo spear pierced his face, driving through his cheek. Blood poured from the wound. Surrounded and unable to defend himself effectively, Magellan fell to his knees. The warriors closed in with their bladed weapons. They hacked at him repeatedly with scimitars, cutting into his arms, legs, and torso. His men had already fled back to the boats, leaving him alone on the beach. Ferdinand Magellan died there in the surf, his body torn apart by multiple wounds as the tide washed around him. Forced seppuku amidst fire. On June 21, 1582, Oda Nobunaga was resting at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, Japan. The warlord had unified most of Japan through decades of military campaigns and political ruthlessness. He was 47 years old and traveled with only a small bodyguard of servants and attendants. The temple was supposed to be a safe place to stop during his journey. Just before dawn, 13,000 soldiers surrounded the compound. They were commanded by Akachi Mitsuhide, one of Nobunaga's most trusted generals. The betrayal was sudden and complete. Mitsuhide's forces moved quickly to seal every exit before launching their attack. Nobunaga woke to the sound of fighting as his guards attempted to hold the gates. He emerged from his chambers to assess the situation. The temple grounds were already overrun with enemy soldiers. His small force was hopelessly outnumbered. Nobunaga grabbed a bow and fought alongside his men, shooting arrows at the attackers flooding through the corridors. But the assault was overwhelming. Within minutes, most of his guards lay dead or dying, as the enemy pressed deeper into the temple complex. Mitsuhide's soldiers set the wooden buildings ablaze. Smoke began filling the interior spaces. Flames spread rapidly across the dry timber and paper walls. Nobunaga retreated further inside as the fire consumed the outer structures. He could hear enemy soldiers everywhere, shouting and searching for him. Nobunaga understood that escape was impossible. The temple was surrounded, burning, and his enemies would show no mercy if they captured him alive. He withdrew to an inner chamber and knelt on the floor. Following the samurai code, he chose to end his life on his own terms rather than face the dishonor of capture. He performed seppuku, cutting across his abdomen with a blade. The ritual disembowelment was swift. As he completed the act, flames engulfed the room around him. The fire consumed his body along with the rest of the temple. When Mitsuhide's men finally entered the smoldering ruins hours later, they found nothing identifiable. Oda Nobunaga's remains were reduced to ash, leaving no body to desecrate or display. Betrayed and decapitated. On September 28th, 48 BC, Pompey the Great stood on the deck of his warship anchored off the coast of Egypt. The Roman general had just lost a civil war against Julius Caesar at the Battle of Pharsalus. His army was destroyed, his political power gone, and he was fleeing for his life. Egypt seemed like his last hope for sanctuary. Pompey was 58 years old and had once been the most powerful man in Rome. He had conquered territories across the Mediterranean and commanded the loyalty of legions. Now he was a desperate refugee seeking protection from the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who was only 15 years old at the time. From the shore, Egyptian officials appeared to welcome him. They sent a small boat rowed by several men, including a Roman officer named Lucius Septimius, who had once served under Pompey. The presence of a former subordinate seemed reassuring. Pompey's wife Cornelia and his advisors watched from the ship as he prepared to go ashore. Pompey climbed down into the small boat. He brought only 2 attendants with him. As the boat moved away from his ship toward the beach, he remained standing, reading a speech he had prepared in Greek to present to the young pharaoh. He was focused on the document, not paying attention to the men around him. When the boat was far enough from his ship that no one could intervene, the Egyptians attacked. Lucius Septimius drew his sword and stabbed Pompey in the back. The blade pierced between his ribs, driving deep into his organs. Pompey gasped and tried to turn, but the other men in the boat immediately joined the assault, stabbing him repeatedly. Pompey fell to his knees in the bottom of the boat. He pulled his toga over his face in a final gesture of Roman dignity, refusing to let his killers see his expression as he died. Within moments, he was dead from the multiple stab wounds. The assassins then drew a blade across his neck and severed his head completely. They threw his body onto the beach where it lay exposed in the sand, rotting under the Egyptian sun, while they took his head as proof to present to Caesar. Molten gold throat punishment. On December 25, 1553, Pedro de Valdivia faced his final battle at Tucapel in southern Chile. The Spanish conquistador governed the territory he had claimed for Spain through years of violent conquest. He commanded a force of exhausted soldiers who had been fighting continuous rebellions by the native Mapuche people. Leading the Mapuche warriors was Lautaro, a young man who had once served as Valdivia's personal page before escaping and joining the resistance. The ambush was carefully planned. Lautaro had learned Spanish military tactics during his time in captivity and used that knowledge against his former captors. As Valdivia's column marched through the forested terrain near Tucapel, thousands of Mapuche fighters attacked from multiple directions. The Spanish were quickly overwhelmed. Their horses became useless in the dense vegetation, and their formations broke apart under the coordinated assault. Valdivia was pulled from his horse and taken alive. The Mapuche had no intention of killing him quickly. They stripped him of his armor and bound him tightly. For hours, they inflicted a very uncomfortable time on the conquistador, beating him with clubs and fists. His face swelled, bones cracked, but he remained conscious throughout the ordeal. The Mapuche knew Valdivia's obsession with gold. He had spent years forcing indigenous people to extract precious metals from mines, enriching himself while native workers died from exhaustion and mistreatment. The warriors decided his end should reflect his greed. They built a fire and placed gold taken from Spanish camps into a container above the flames. When the metal reached a liquid state, glowing orange and unbearably hot, they forced Valdivia's mouth open. They poured the molten gold down his throat. The superheated liquid burned through his mouth, throat, and esophagus instantly. His internal tissues boiled and melted. He could not scream because the metal sealed his airway. Death came within seconds, but those seconds were filled with unimaginable agony. The ritual did not end there. The Mapuche cut open his chest and removed his heart while it was still warm. They consumed portions of it in a ceremony, believing they would absorb his strength and courage for future battles against the Spanish invaders. Burned alive in Cottage. On August 9th, 378 AD, Emperor Valens led the Eastern Roman army against the Visigoths near the city of Adrianople in modern-day Turkey. The emperor was 50 years old and had ruled for 14 years. He commanded an estimated 40,000 soldiers, one of the largest Roman forces assembled in decades. Valens believed his numerical advantage would guarantee victory against the Gothic tribes that had been raiding imperial territory. The battle began in the afternoon heat. Roman infantry advanced in tight formations toward the Gothic position, but they had marched all day without proper rest or water. The soldiers were exhausted before fighting even started. As the Romans engaged the Gothic foot soldiers, thousands of Gothic cavalry suddenly appeared on the horizon. They had been away foraging and returned at the perfect moment to strike the Roman flanks. The cavalry charge shattered the Roman lines completely. Soldiers trapped in the center of the formation were crushed together so tightly they could not raise their weapons. Panic spread rapidly. Units broke and ran in every direction. The organized Roman army dissolved into chaos within minutes. Tens of thousands of soldiers died on that field, cut down as they tried to flee. During the collapse, an arrow struck Emperor Valens. The wound was not immediately fatal, but it rendered him unable to fight or move quickly. His personal guards formed a protective circle and carried him from the battlefield. They brought him to a small peasant cottage nearby, hoping to hide him until the fighting ended and they could arrange safe transport. Inside the cottage, the guards barricaded the door and tended to the emperor's wound. But Gothic cavalry units were sweeping across the area, searching buildings and killing any survivors they found. A group of riders surrounded the structure without knowing who was inside. They assumed it held Roman soldiers trying to hide. The Goths set fire to the cottage. Flames spread quickly across the thatched roof and wooden walls. Inside, Valens and his guards found themselves trapped. The door was blocked by debris and enemy forces outside. Smoke filled the small space within seconds. The emperor died from smoke inhalation and burns as the building collapsed around him. His body was never recovered from the ashes or identified among the charred remains. Blood-sealing sacrifice. On September 8, 1600, Tori Mototada stood inside Fushimi Castle in Kyoto as commander of a garrison that had no chance of survival. Outside the walls, 40,000 enemy soldiers surrounded the fortress. Mototada was a veteran samurai loyal to Tokugawa Ieyasu, and he had been ordered to hold the castle as long as possible while his lord prepared for a larger battle elsewhere. He knew this was a mission with only one ending. The siege began with demands for surrender. Mototada refused every offer. His garrison numbered fewer than 2,000 men. The enemy brought siege engines, ladders, and endless waves of soldiers. For 11 days, the defenders held their positions. They fought from the walls, in the courtyards, and through the castle halls. Food ran out. Water grew scarce. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Still, Mototada would not yield. On the final day, the enemy breached the outer defenses. Enemy soldiers poured through gaps in the walls. The garrison pulled back to the inner keep, knowing the end had arrived. Mototada gathered his remaining men in the castle's main hall. They had fought as ordered. Now they would die as samurai. The ritual began in waves. Men knelt on the wooden floorboards, drew their blades, and cut into their own abdomens. The traditional seppuku required a horizontal cut across the stomach, followed by an upward stroke. It was not a quick death. Blood poured from the wounds as men leaned forward in agony. Some took minutes to die. Others required assistance from a second to complete the act. The floor became slick with blood. More than 300 men performed seppuku in that hall. The blood pooled across the wooden planks, soaking deep into the grain. It spread into cracks and joints, staining the timber dark red. When the enemy finally entered, they found the room filled with corpses and soaked in blood. The stains never came out. Years later, the blood-soaked floorboards were removed and repurposed. Temple builders installed them as ceiling panels in several Kyoto temples. The bloodstains remain visible today, preserved as a memorial to the men who refused to surrender. Ginkgo tree assassination. On February 13, 1219, Minamoto no Sanetomo walked through the grounds of Tsurugaoka Hachimangu Shrine in Kamakura. He was 26 years old and served as the third shogun of the Kamakura shogunate. Snow fell steadily that evening as he attended a ceremonial celebration following his promotion to a higher court rank. Sanetomo wore formal robes and moved with the slow, deliberate pace expected of someone in his position. Attendants followed behind him, carrying torches to light the path. Near the shrine's stone steps stood a massive ginkgo tree. The tree was already ancient, its trunk thick enough that several men standing side by side could not reach around it. Its branches spread wide overhead, and in the darkness and falling snow, the space behind it offered perfect concealment. Hidden there was Kugyo, Sanetomo's 19-year-old nephew and the son of the second shogun. Kugyo had been passed over for succession. The position had gone to his uncle instead. Resentment had festered for years. On this night, he waited in the cold with a drawn sword, watching his uncle's procession approach. The ceremonial nature of the event meant guards were positioned at a distance. Protocol demanded space and dignity for the shogun during religious ceremonies. Kugyo knew this. He had planned for it. As Sanetomo climbed the stone steps and passed within arm's reach of the ginkgo tree, Kugyo sprang forward. The attack was instant. One powerful downward stroke severed Sanetomo's head cleanly from his body. The cut was precise, practiced. The head fell, and Kugyo immediately grabbed it. Attendants screamed. Guards rushed forward, but Kugyo had already vanished into the darkness with his prize. A massive search began immediately. Soldiers scoured the shrine grounds and surrounding areas. They found Kugyo hours later and killed him. But Sanetomo's head was never recovered. Some believed Kugyo disposed of it before his capture. Others thought accomplices took it. The head's location remains unknown. With Sanetomo's death, the direct Minamoto bloodline that had founded the shogunate ended. The family's grip on power collapsed. Control passed to the Hojo clan, who ruled as regents. One ambush behind a tree had destroyed an entire dynasty. Frozen rice field. On February 21st, 1184, Minamoto no Yoshinaka fled across the winter landscape near Lake Biwa. He had been a powerful general, briefly controlling the capital of Kyoto, but political miscalculations and military defeats had turned him into a fugitive. His cousin Minamoto no Yoritomo had sent armies to eliminate him. The Battle of Awazu was lost. Now Yoshinaka ran for his life with only a handful of loyal companions. Among them was Tomoe Gozen, a female warrior known for her skill in combat. She had fought beside Yoshinaka in multiple battles, but during the retreat, they became separated in the chaos. Yoshinaka rode hard, enemy cavalry close behind. The frozen rice paddies stretched ahead, their surfaces covered in snow and ice. To a desperate man, they looked like solid ground, a path to escape. Yoshinaka urged his horse forward onto the field. The surface held for the first few strides. Then the horse's hooves broke through the frozen crust. Beneath the ice and snow lay thick, waterlogged mud from the flooded rice paddy. The horse's legs plunged deep. It struggled, thrashing to pull free, but each movement only drove it deeper into the mire. Yoshinaka tried to dismount, but his own weight pushed him further into the mud. It gripped his legs, his waist, holding him in place like a trap. The cold made the mud dense and heavy. He could not move forward or backward. His horse panicked beside him, equally stuck. Behind him, he heard the pursuit closing in. He twisted his body, looking back across the field, searching for Tomo Gozen. In that moment, an arrow struck him in the face. The impact snapped his head sideways. He was still conscious, still trapped in the freezing mud, unable to raise his arms to defend himself or pull the arrow free. Enemy soldiers reached the edge of the rice paddy. They approached carefully on foot, spreading their weight to avoid sinking. Yoshinaka watched them come, immobilized, bleeding from his face. When they reached him, they drew their swords. He died stuck in the mud, beheaded while unable to move his body or lift a weapon. Anchor drowning defeat. On April 25, 1185, the Taira clan faced complete annihilation at the Battle of Dan-no-ura. The naval engagement took place in the narrow Shimonoseki Strait, where currents ran strong and deep. For years, the Taira had controlled Japan through their connection to the imperial family and military dominance. Now their fleet burned and sank around them. Minamoto forces had outmaneuvered them, and escape was impossible. Taira no Tomomori stood on the deck of his warship and watched his clan's destruction unfold. He was a general who had led campaigns across Japan. Surrender meant capture, humiliation, and likely a public end designed to entertain his enemies. He refused to give them that satisfaction. Around him, other Taira nobles made similar decisions. Some threw themselves into the water wearing full armor, others cut their own throats. Tomomori chose a different method. He walked to where the ship's anchor rested on deck. The anchor was a massive iron weight, designed to hold a warship steady against ocean currents. It weighed several hundred pounds. Tomomori ordered sailors to bring rope and help him secure the anchor to his armor. They wrapped the rope around his chest and waist multiple times, binding the iron mass tightly against his body. The weight was immense. He could barely stand upright with it attached. The act carried symbolic meaning. An anchor keeps a vessel from drifting, holds it in place even during storms. By tying himself to it, Tomomori ensured his body would never surface, never drift to shore, never be recovered by enemies and put on display. He would sink straight to the bottom and stay there. He climbed onto the ship's rail. The Shimonoseki Strait stretched below, its waters dark and churning. Without hesitation, he stepped off. The anchor's weight pulled him down immediately. There was no floating, no struggle at the surface. He plunged beneath the waves and descended rapidly into the darkness. The pressure increased as he sank deeper. His lungs burned, then filled with seawater. The anchor dragged him down past the point where light penetrated into complete blackness. His body reached the bottom of the strait and settled there, held in place by the iron weight, never to be found. Standing death arrows. On June 15, 1189, the warrior monk Saida Musashibo Benkei positioned himself at the entrance to Koromogawa no Tachi, a narrow bridge crossing in northern Japan. Behind him, his master Minamoto no Yoshitsune fled from pursuing forces. Benkei was a massive man, over 6 feet tall with the strength and combat experience of someone who had fought in dozens of battles. His task was simple: hold the bridge long enough for Yoshitsune to escape. He knew he would not survive. Enemy soldiers arrived in waves. The bridge's narrow width meant they could only approach a few at a time. Benkei wielded a naginata, a pole weapon with a curved blade at its end. He swept it in wide arcs, cutting down anyone who tried to pass. The first wave fell, then the second. Bodies piled at the bridge entrance. Soldiers climbed over their dead companions to reach him. Benkei continued fighting. Hours passed. His armor took blow after blow. Swords struck his shoulders, his arms, his legs. He ignored the wounds and kept swinging. Blood soaked through his robes. His movement slowed, but he maintained his position. No one could get past him. The enemy commanders changed tactics. They ordered their soldiers to stop engaging in close combat. Instead, archers moved forward and began firing from a distance. Arrows flew toward Benkei in volleys. The first struck his chest, then his shoulders, his legs. He remained standing, naginata ready, blocking the bridge. More arrows came. They hit his arms, his stomach, his back. Still he stood. The arrows kept coming. Dozens struck him. His body became a target that absorbed shaft after shaft. Eventually, he stopped moving. He stood motionless at the bridge entrance, weapon in hand, facing the enemy. The soldiers waited, watching for any sign of life. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Finally, they approached cautiously. When they reached him, they discovered he had died while still standing upright. So many arrows had pierced his body that they acted as supports, holding his corpse vertical. His legs were locked in position. His grip on the naginata had not loosened. The enemy counted over 60 arrows embedded in his body and armor. Wooden Ore Duel. On April 13, 1612, Sasaki Kojiro waited on Ganryujima, a small island in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu. He was one of Japan's most feared swordsmen, known for his unique technique and his weapon, a nodachi blade longer than most katanas. The sword measured over 3 feet in length, giving him superior reach in combat. He had agreed to duel Miyamoto Musashi, a rival strategist and fighter. The time was set for 8 in the morning. Musashi did not arrive at 8. 9 o'clock passed. Then 10. Kojiro paced the beach, his anger building. The delay was deliberate psychological warfare. Musashi wanted his opponent agitated and impatient. Finally, around 11, a small boat appeared on the water. Musashi stood in it, rowing toward the island. During the journey across the strait, Musashi had carved a wooden sword from one of the boat's spare oars. The oar was thick, heavy, and roughly 4 feet long. It had no edge, no point, just blunt wood shaped into a crude blade. When Kojiro saw this makeshift weapon, he understood it as an insult. Musashi was challenging him with a wooden stick instead of proper steel. The duel began the moment Musashi stepped onto the beach. Kojiro drew his nodachi in a flash and swung at Musashi's head. The blade was so long and Kojiro so skilled that the cut should have been impossible to avoid. But Musashi leaped forward and upward, clearing the arc of the sword. As he came down, he swung the wooden oar with both hands. The heavy wood struck Kojiro on the side of his skull. The impact was devastating. The force of the blow fractured his skull and knocked him sideways onto the sand. Musashi did not stop. He brought the oar down again, striking Kojiro's ribs. Bones cracked. Kojiro tried to rise, but another blow caught him across the head. His skull gave way under the repeated impacts. Within moments, Kojiro lay dead on the beach. His face was crushed. His ribs were shattered. The famous swordsman had been killed by blunt force trauma from a boat oar. Musashi walked back to his boat and left the island without looking back. Crucified messenger spear. In June of 1575, Nagashino Castle in central Japan endured a brutal siege by the Takeda army. Inside the fortress, defenders were running out of food and supplies. Their only hope was reinforcements from Tokugawa Ieyasu, but they had no way to know if help was coming. A messenger needed to slip through enemy lines and return with information. Tori Suneemon, a foot soldier loyal to the castle's lord, volunteered for the mission. Suneemon left the castle under cover of darkness and made his way through the Takeda siege lines. He reached Tokugawa's forces, delivered his message, and received confirmation that reinforcements were on their way. He attempted to return to the castle with this crucial information, but on his way back, Takeda scouts spotted him and gave chase. He was captured before he could reach the castle walls. The Takeda commanders recognized an opportunity. They constructed a wooden cross and nailed Suneemon to it. They positioned the cross in an open area clearly visible to both armies. Defenders on Nagashino Castle's walls could see him. Takeda soldiers surrounded the base of the cross. The Takeda plan was simple: force Suneemon to shout that no reinforcements were coming, breaking the defenders' morale and encouraging surrender. Takeda officers gave the order. They told Suneemon to announce to his allies that help would not arrive, that they were abandoned. Both armies fell silent, listening. Suneemon drew a deep breath. Then he shouted the opposite. He yelled that Tokugawa's reinforcements were on their way, that the castle should hold out, that rescue was coming soon. The Takeda commanders reacted instantly. Soldiers standing near the cross thrust their spears into Suneemon's body. Multiple blades pierced his chest, stomach, and sides. He died within seconds, impaled on the cross in full view of everyone watching. His body remained there, displayed between the two armies. The defenders inside Nagashino Castle heard his final message. They held their positions. 2 days later, Tokugawa's reinforcements arrived and broke the siege. The castle was saved. Unarmed Bath Betrayal. On February 11th, 1160, Minamoto no Yoshitomo fled through Owari province as a hunted man. He had led the Minamoto clan in the Heiji rebellion against the Taira, and he had lost. His army was destroyed. His allies were dead or scattered. Taira forces searched the countryside for survivors, offering rewards for information leading to his capture. Yoshitomo traveled with only a handful of loyal followers, moving from place to place seeking anyone who might offer shelter. He arrived at the home of Asada Tadamune, a retainer who had once served under him. Yoshitomo believed he could trust this man. Tadamune welcomed him inside, offered food, and suggested he rest. After days of running and hiding, Yoshitomo accepted the hospitality. Tadamune proposed that his lord use the bath to wash away the dirt and exhaustion of the road. In Japanese tradition, the bath was a place of relaxation and vulnerability. Weapons were left outside the bathing area. It would have been disrespectful and paranoid to bring a sword into someone's bath. Yoshitomo followed custom. He removed his armor and his swords, leaving them in another room. He entered the bath naked and unarmed. The water was hot. For the first time in days, Yoshitomo allowed himself to relax. His muscles loosened. His guard dropped. He sat in the steaming water, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Outside the bath, Tadamune was not preparing towels or clean clothes. He was gathering armed soldiers. The door burst open. Tadamune entered with multiple men carrying weapons. Yoshitomo had no time to react. He was naked, sitting in water, completely defenseless. The soldiers attacked immediately. Swords struck him from multiple angles. He tried to rise from the bath, but blades cut into his shoulders, his chest, his arms. The water turned red around him. Yoshitomo died in the bath, unable to fight back or escape. His body remained in the bloodied water. Tadamune claimed the reward from the Taira for killing the Minamoto leader. Yoshitomo's young sons, including the future Shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo, survived only because they were elsewhere when their father was murdered. They would later avenge this betrayal and destroy the Taira clan entirely.